Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Sales Chatter,
Mm.
the logistics podcast, where we aim to help 10,000 reps hit a million GP. I'm your co-host Ryan Mohammed. With me is my main man, the bodacious cowboy,
Mm.
President CEO of RGTX Logistics Solutions, Jeff Dickinson. How you doing this morning, my friend?
Good. And we also have a really good friend, Dean Croke, the principal analyst for DAT Freight and Analytics. So let's
Yeah,
get into this. Let's go.
let's go.
To the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly.
I want to say good morning to Daman. So happy to see everybody out here this morning.
Yeah,
Dean,
good
you got a
morning.
nice little background going on there. Where you at this week?
Nice little place called the Ritz-Carlton on Amelia Island, just north of Jacksonville. It's a barrier island, so it's not like I'm out in the middle of the ocean, but I watched the sunrise for the first time the last 2 mornings. It's absolutely spectacular down here on the beach. So it's the Stifel Investment Research Annual Conference. A lot of the large truckload carriers, all of the big warehouse companies are here. A lot of the names that we've talked about before. So there's a lot of private equity firms here, a lot of bankers, a lot of truck companies, big and small. And it's their annual event. A lot of one-on-one meetings. So it's a lot of folks don't want to disclose their position publicly in sort of meetings with questions. There's a lot of one-on-one meetings that goes on. But we presented yesterday. We did our spot market update yesterday in a fireside chat with Bert Subin,
Nice.
who's head of the Transportation and Logistics Division. So it's a very interesting conference. First time for me down here at this conference, but we've done a number of podcasts, media excluded podcasts for all of their, Stifel Transport and Logistics investors over the last couple of years. But this is the first time they've been back since the pandemic started with a face-to-face event. So it was quite
So I
the
got to
thing.
ask you, Dean. I got to ask you, any rumors on any M&As?
No one would say a thing. Despite all of the lubrication last night with copious amounts of beer and wine, and there was
And
a
still nobody
party,
chatted.
not a peep. We tried hard. My wife was leading the charge because she can sort of get people talking without them even knowing they're talking, and she couldn't get any intel out of anybody either. So they were all very coy. I think they go to a school on how not to disclose information but talk at the same time. They're pretty good at it.
That's awesome, guys. See, and speaking of your wife being able to have that conversation with anybody, I want to get into Valentine's Day with you, Dean. It's one of the
Right.
I would say one of the main holidays to basically start the
Right.
year that we all kind of look forward to. A lot of things are kind of changing. I was kind of reading your blog, which everybody should check out. Your blog that came out yesterday. What can you tell us about just Valentine's Day, the impact that it has in terms of like numbers? Because I know you put some numbers in the blog specifically.
Yeah, it's one of those seasonal events. Like some of these big events that we have around public holidays and major retail events move the needle on a national level. Some don't. And even though this is technically produce, it's more ornamental, so it's less fruit and veg. But it's so heavily concentrated in the Miami airport because about 93%, give or take, of our fresh cut roses and carnations come from Ecuador and Colombia. So it's only 3 hours by plane. And Miami's a massive air freight hub for Latin America and even Europe. So what you've got here is a big infrastructure for temperature-controlled freight at Miami Airport. It's automatically a hub for air cargo. If you go to Miami Airport, you'll see, LATAM Airlines, Air Cargo, Polar Air, Calita. All of the big air cargo firms are in and out of here all day. FedEx, UPS, of course. So it's a big hub from an infrastructure point of view, but it's also ideal because it's a really easy place to get high volumes of flowers in, and they'll load 60, 70 tons in the 747 air freighter. They'll whip them into Miami in 3 hours. And these planes are just going back and forward, have been for the last month. The biggest shipping week was last week in terms of volume. This week is a little bit less. But what happens then from a trucking perspective, and it does move the needle in Miami, but not nationally. Reefer rates went down last week, only a penny per mile, but they went up considerably in Miami from a fairly low base because you have so many loads of freight, time sensitive, that has to move out of Miami and it's got to go north and then all points from there. So it's concentrated in one very small, tiny footprint in America, but it has a huge impact on carriers. So some of the big carriers like Prime Floral, Armalini, there's some big carriers that specialize in floral transport. I'm sure you guys have been involved in that in your time. But there's a lot of spot market activity too for carriers. So what you see is as the early part of produce season starts in Lakeland, Orlando districts and sort of southern Florida, and then flowers start coming in big numbers, you start to see spot rates go up in both of those markets in central and southern Florida, which is what happened last week. For carriers, though, it's not all roses, right? It's a lot of hand unload. So if you ever handled soft, flimsy boxes of roses, long stem roses on a pallet, they're pretty awkward. And for a lot of the guys, they're doing multiple deliveries, and it's live unload at places that don't necessarily have forklifts. Some of the big locations, of course, are well equipped. But if you talk to a lot of drivers that end up with these loads, it's not a lot of fun for them. And of course, it takes a while to unload them. But when you're deep in Florida, you take what you can get, and because it's a deep backhaul market.
Oh, yeah.
One of the data points that we said here in my report, I'll just quickly read it. Reefer rates northbound out of Miami up 15 cents a mile last week. So national rates were down a penny, but out of Miami up 15 cents to only $1.36. So remember, that's excluding fuel. You have to add 55 cents to that. Miami to Philadelphia up 9 cents to $1.41. Brooklyn loads were up to $1.53. Outbound Lakeland loads up to $1.30. These are pretty, these are not decent rates. They're very low rates if you're a carrier. Probably great if you're a broker buying capacity at that low rate. But for carriers, it's sort of, really don't have a lot of choices because there's so much volume coming into the state versus going out. So rates are going up. They normally, produce season out of Florida will peak in May. So after that, it gets too hot. So we'll start to see produce or rates for produce reefer loads start to climb between now and May. But we're still a long way south of where we were this time last year. Like we're almost $1 a mile lower than where we were on all of those lanes this time last year. So the market has really cooled off from that in that regard. So that's sort of the Miami Day story. It's a fascinating one that sort of happens over it starts early January. They start bringing in the volumes early January, but it really ramped up last week and this week, and that's when it dies down pretty quickly. To the point, it's such a big deal that Prime Floral will put out on Flora. Is it Flora or Floral? I can't remember the name, but Prime Inc. have a massive floral division, and they will put out on their website sometime around the start of the year all of their surcharges and all of their schedules that they have for shipping. There's only certain days of the week they'll ship. They had temperature set. I think they require all of the flowers to be delivered at 55 degrees into their shop before they load them on the trailers. So there's very strict shipping and temperature control and packaging that goes on around this, and then surcharges. They add a surcharge to these loads, and I think it's somewhere between 10 and 20% they apply as a surcharge on loads during this period of time. So that gives you an idea of how much volume there is because they start to impose these surcharges each year. So that's the story around roses.
Got a quick question for you, Dean. I'm not sure if you could answer this. Over the last 5 years, how has the deadhead miles, because you mentioned, a huge backhaul, which everybody knows, but has the deadhead miles subsided compared to like 2 years ago? Because I know a lot of them used to deadhead to get up into the Atlanta area to get those profitable loads to pull up to the north, to the west.
That's a great question because we don't track yet the deadhead component. We've got a lot of location data coming out of our DAT1 app where drivers, enable tracking when they're under a load. So we're starting to get that data.
Has something to do with price, right? Because if you're going deep into the south, into the Miami area, you're going to get charged. But they're going to take into consideration that backhaul, the deadhead miles, because it's a losing proposition.
So to your point, I think historically, when we look at our spot market data, for every 2 loads that come into Florida, 1 goes out. Right, so it's a 2-to-1 ratio. So you've always got to factor in that 200 or 300 mile deadhead. But with the increase of freight volume into the East Coast, during the pandemic, there is more volume here on the East Coast. How that's impacted the deadhead component out of Southern Florida, I'm not sure. That's a data point I need to chase down. But the other point, one of the big, investment communities that are down here are the warehouse guys and all the private equity firms. A lot of PE firms have invested a lot of money in warehouses. We've talked about some of the big dogs, here on the show before, but they're here at this event looking to invest in more warehouses, and there are more warehouses going in Florida. So whether that's inbound, it's a net inbound play, I'm not sure. I suspect there's more freight coming out of Florida than there has been before, but I think my instinct is that there's still a heavy deadhead component coming out of this state for sure.
Pretty interesting.
Jacksonville, Jacksonville. I talked to someone about Jacksonville Port because we've seen a lot of growth in Savannah, Tampa, Miami, but not Jacksonville. Jacksonville has got, I think there's money issues. One of the big investors here told me that there are, it's money issues are the big problem, but there's also some infrastructure issues that I've got to deal with. So it's a very strong spot market for DAT, as it is without import volumes coming in. I just noticed on I-95 yesterday, you see an awful amount of dray carriers running south and north, south loaded back north. So that tells me that it's either Brunswick or Savannah that they're pulling out of. Could be Jacksonville, but the way that, we were north of Jacksonville and I could tell they were loaded on the southbound leg and empty on the way back. So there's those old chassis trailers with the Dayton wheels and the recaps. So we had a funny story. So we're roaring along 95 and it's like a raceway. So everybody's doing like 90 miles an hour. And they're hammering north towards Brunswick. And my wife said, geez, look at these people. They're crazy. Guy came around me on the right-hand side, cut across 3 lanes of traffic, cut in front of a car, almost took their bumper off, and then hit a gator. Now, a gator as in the rubber recap gator. They call them gators, right? The recaps that come off these trailers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, call them gators. So it was the full recap. The whole tire came off this chassis trailer.
Jeez.
And he went over it. Two cars went over it. This thing went flying in the air. Everybody is just going at 100 miles an hour.
Dodging it.
Yeah, I was just saying.
It's nuts. I hit one of those one night and did $2,000 worth of damage to my Peterbilt.
I think everybody was in a rush to go see LeBron James win the scoring title last night. So LeBron James is the official scoring title. I want to talk a little bit about
driving.
Exactly. Gotta see LeBron. We gotta from there. Just before we move on from Valentine's Day, what do you guys got any plans? Any plans for your wives for Valentine's Day, or any advice for anybody who are newer couples for Valentine's Day? Because do not miss that day. As much as she says she doesn't want anything, she does.
Yeah, she does. Yeah, do something. I've got no idea. I write about this stuff. I'm probably the worst. I'm just terrible at this. I got to get my head in the game here. I don't know what to do about that.
Yeah, that's funny. That's me. It's a big time year for myself. And my wife. I met my wife 43 years ago on February 13th. Then you got Valentine's Day. And then we got married on the 15th. So they're like, man, that was a shotgun wedding. You met her on the 13th and got married on the 15th.
Right. So, I don't know what's funnier, Nerve. Some of the comments, you got to read the comments. Can everybody on the show see the comments?
Yeah. Everybody could.
Yeah,
it's for everybody. Yeah, it's for everybody to see.
It's hilarious. You hit a gator. It was a barbecue.
You got to make sure it was fine there.
Hey, I'd love to have it. What's that?
Gator meat is pretty good. Have you ever had that?
No.
I definitely. I mean, they have it like Louisiana gumbo with gator meat in it. It is pretty good. I would strongly recommend you try that.
Does it taste like chicken?
No. I mean, that's what they say about frog legs, right? It tastes like chicken. Never ate frog legs, but I had gator, and I didn't realize it. I was like, man, this is good. What's in it? And the guy told me. Yeah. I was in Louisiana. Oh, that's gator. And I was like, are you kidding?
Gator roti.
I'll try to get a gator roti later on, like that. But it's for gents, just from experience that I have with Valentine's Day. Even you look at the other companies that are just blooming. Look at Edible Arrangements. I would love to see their numbers on Valentine's Day and Mother's Day. right? I would think like those guys are just booming for great companies
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Fun fact
Yeah.
for you, Dean, you know when you see in those stores like they got those like cheesy like Valentine's bears and they come with like a little chocolate, like it comes like a little package. You see them in Walmart and stuff.
Right.
There's a customer that we're talking to that they do 15 loads a week out of Mexico.
Wow. Oh, wow. Really?
into the States. So I know you're talking
Yeah.
about Mexico quite a bit, and it's crazy to think like those things are coming out of there.
Yeah, I think it's very commodity specific, right? The nearshoring. It depends on, iPhones are probably very labor intensive. They'll stay in China, but certain commodities can be nearshored to Mexico that maybe aren't as labor intensive. So yeah, I think that's probably one of those categories. But you're right. So you touch on a point. There's a lot of volume that's already moved well ahead of the flowers moving out of Miami. So chocolates, beer, all those sorts of things. Well, not necessarily beer, I guess. That's Super Bowl. But there's a lot of volume that's moving that's already positioned in market that has a longer lead time. So some of our folks said, well, shouldn't we see a big bump in truckload volumes out of Hershey, PA for chocolates? I said, well, no, not really, because a lot of it's moving continually year round.
Yeah,
and people will have this inventory in place as before. So we don't see, when you think about where a lot of the volume comes from for big events like this, we don't see the needle move really anywhere except in Miami, because there's such a concentration in a small 3-digit zip code.
But question for you, Dean. That's because we always make fun, like when we're coming up to close to Christmas, we always joke about Christmas trees, right? That's always like the joke that we always kind of have on the show. What has the biggest market that you've personally seen? Like, is it going to be the flowers coming up to Valentine's Day, or is it going to be those Christmas trees going into Christmas?
Right. You mean just over the course of a year?
Over the course of a year, yeah.
It's a really good question. I would say Christmas trees. Yeah. So Jeff, sort of, I think you beat me to it, but North Carolina is sort of number 2 or 1. Pacific Northwest is maybe 1 or 2, depending on volumes. You get a lot out of Quebec and northern Maine. So yeah, I think nationally, Christmas trees is probably the most intense. It starts before Thanksgiving. I mean, they've all got to be in car parks before Thanksgiving. But you see wreaths start earlier than that in vans. You'll take the trees for wreath makers. And then, of course, the export to Hawaii starts probably 3 to 4 weeks before Thanksgiving. So it's a much longer duration event and reasonably specialized because of the live unload load deal.
And the other thing too that a lot of people don't talk about is depending upon how fresh those trees are, you have to worry about the sap content inside those trailers that have to be cleaned out. So there's additional charges that are going to be incurred.
I think when we talked about this, I think Nerf said that he or somebody had a leaf blower. So when they would get to maybe it was a friend of mine that was unloading down, and he has a leaf blower, so they come out and blow the van out before he goes to his next point. But sap would be definitely a point. So yes, I think it's more Christmas trees would have a bigger impact. More bigger. It's probably the wrong grammar, but and then produce season, of course, going into July 4. That's the biggest impact on the produce side.
I think other ones would be potatoes and onions. I think that would probably be the biggest ones, and those are the scariest ones. Not the potatoes, but the onions, because if you got corrugated and that driver happened to pick up a load of fresh onions, if that trailer is not cleaned out and you've got corrugated in it, it will absorb that smell in it, man. You don't want that on your shelves in Walmart or anything like that. Tell you something.
As bad as spilling diesel.
I did onions when I first got in the industry, and never again. They were pretty brutal. Nasty stuff. Dean and Jeff, another market that I'm looking at specifically, just for like the aspect of what's going on, is Phoenix. So we've got the Phoenix Open starting tomorrow, which is the golf tournament. And then obviously everybody knows the Super Bowl is coming on Sunday. And Phoenix, from what I'm seeing through social media and different things on LinkedIn, Phoenix is becoming a hot zone for freight. I'm kind of seeing that people are kind of looking at them, other than we talked about like Texas and things like that. Talk to us a little bit about Super Bowl, the impacts that it has in tourism, in terms of freight. Like you said, most of this stuff should already be there. In terms of like everything that's been delivered, perishables and non-perishables. But what does the impact look like from a trucking standpoint?
Well, in terms of being a complete data geek, I took a swag at how many loads this meant for Sunday. And some of the data that in terms of the volume of stuff that gets consumed is staggering. If you start with avocados, right, there's something like 26 million avocados we're going to consume on Sunday. And that a lot of that's going to come from central Mexico, but high in the volcanic region, right in the center of the country. Good deal of it comes into far Texas in the McAllen freight market, right in southern Texas. And that sort of goes nationally from there. But there's a lot of volume. Whenever you have a Super Bowl on the West Coast, you see a disproportionate amount of avocados in particular going through the Nogales border crossing zone, straight up I-19 onto I-10, and then it's a straight shot into Phoenix. So I was down there a week before last, and you could see a lot of reefer carriers just running backwards and forwards on that lane. I think it's about a 450-mile lane. I think it's maybe a little bit longer. So that happens. I mean, that's a year-round lane, right? So you're seeing a lot of volume move because you've got, California not far away, and obviously the north. You see a lot of carriers running to the Pacific Northwest out of that region. But there's a lot of volume moving there now, and I'll quote you some of the stats that I was able to glean from different sources. 1.45 billion chicken wings, 300 million gallons of beer, 14,500 tons of chips. I think they mean fries. 12 tons of nachos, 4,000 tons of popcorn. And it was 13.2 million pounds of avocado, including the casing. So it's a little bit less. But when I took 45,000 pound loads for all of that, it's about 70,000 truckloads of freight, which is a lot for an event. But it's a small number in the broader context of 225 million loads a year, across the entire country. But it's a lot into a small market around Glendale. A lot of distribution centers, a lot of cold stores. Some of that stuff is very time sensitive. Obviously, all the beer has, been in there in all the different markets for a long time. But that's the Super Bowl. It's a big event, and it does move the needle a little bit on some of those lanes. It didn't move the needle nationally, but I'll bet next week when we talk on the show that we will see some pretty healthy numbers on inbound freight into Phoenix, and it's a growing market too, right? Just for general freight on the outbound side because of all the warehouse distribution that's been going on. So it's typically a net inbound freight, so you get more loads going in than out. But I think that's growing on the outbound side. Obviously, outbound rates are much cheaper, so it's attractive for a lot of warehouses to be strategically located there. So that's the Super Bowl deal. That's Sunday. Pretty big event.
Who you guys got?
Who
you guys got?
I think I'm with the Chiefs. I don't know. Hard to go past
with the Chiefs. And the reason is that I'm a Giants fan. I cannot root for the Eagles. And plus, my wife's cousin, used to be the quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles back in the 90s. Yeah. But still, so I'm like on the edge there. But I'm still going with the Chiefs.
I gotta go with the Eagles, man. I gotta pick the Eagles. They're a pretty good team, and who knows if Mahomes is even playing, right? So if Mahomes doesn't play, it'll be.
What's up? I haven't heard. I haven't heard the news. What's happening?
Yeah. Well, he twisted his ankle or something like that, a couple of games ago. So he's been pretty rough, and he should be getting surgery. But getting that adrenaline. That's awesome to kind of see, right? It's the Super Bowl. It's a lot of things that people bring people together. It's one of the days that we look forward to, and I love what the Super Bowl is doing because when I was younger, the Super Bowl meant that me, my dad, and my sister would watch the Super Bowl, and my mom would go shopping. My dad would just give her the credit card and be like, "Go have some fun at the mall." But the halftime show this year is Rihanna, so I don't know. I think you're gonna get one of the loudest, one of the most viewed Super Bowls that we ever had, right? But Super Bowl
is she gonna have a Janet Jackson episode?
That's the After Dark episode of Sales Chatter. I'll leave that one completely alone. Dean, I was watching your show yesterday before we came on, and one thing that was brought up on the conversation was that construction orders were kind of canceled due to everything that's kind of going on. I think Ken was talking about Peller Windows with somebody in his Cub Scouts and things like that. What can you tell us a little bit of tidbits of what kind of happened in the kind of construction industry that we're seeing?
Yesterday's show was fascinating. I learned so much talking to Justin Jalbert from Fast Markets. He's kind of a bit of an expert in this lumber construction space. And he was telling us about some of the numbers. And of course, what they were talking about in the general context, the market was bottoming out, and housing construction was going to start to improve. So we'll put that in the chat section. We'll put the link in later.
Come join us, Nerf.
It'll just be the four of us, I'm sure. But the data point, everybody should watch this on YouTube, right? Especially the last 15 minutes. Forget all my stuff up front. That's all boring. But the really interesting stuff was when Dustin broke down the entire lumber market, housing market. And what I didn't know was that repair and remodeling was about 30 to 40% of lumber demand, which is a staggeringly high number because, as he said on the show, everybody talks about all the sexy numbers, the housing starts and the permits and the houses under construction. But he said the data point that really doesn't get talked about, and it's hard to track this down, are the amount of homes that have been remodeled. And if you cast your mind back to the shows we were doing back during the pandemic, we were talking about people building decks. He called it the DIY boom. And a lot of people were building their own structures in the backyard, converting garages into bedrooms, doing all sorts of remodeling. I was one of those people. We're still doing remodeling on our house right now. But he said that's about 30 to 40% of demand, which is really interesting. And it's cooling down. So it's adding. So if you think about that, it's called a third of overall demand for dimension framing lumber, of which a lot of it comes from the southeast because of the quality. He said that has been a significant number of demand in the last 2 years, but it's cooling right down now. So that's part of not only our housing starts down about 35% year over year. We are also, and I can quote you the exact number, we built at 909,000 in December. That's about 300,000 fewer single homes compared to December 2021. So it's a lot. We're building a lot less homes, but the data point that he shared with us was the builders are becoming more confident. But there were he was talking about cancellations. I've got to go back and look at my notes to get some exact numbers on that. But it was just a really good show. I thought it was very insightful. I walked away from there with a little bit of an optimistic view on the housing market and the flatbed market because our short-term forecasts have flatbed rates bottoming and coming up really quickly, which is good news for carriers in that space. Of course, that shouldn't be a surprise because spring is normally when you see flatbed activity start to increase. And we've had a really mild winter. I don't know if you've noticed. We've had a mild winter in New England. People are still digging holes and building stuff. Normally, when that ground freezes, there's a hiatus. People take time off. Drivers go on, they're furloughed, especially in that sort of the dump truck, space. But they have been flat out all winter. And I think there's more construction activity going on than you would see normally. Normally, steel production is starting to come up. I did looked at some data on that the other day. If you want me to share that, Ryan, I looked at steel production. So we get our data from S&P Platts. Look at the southeast. So think about flatbed rates nationally at about $2.05 a mile, excluding fuel. But in Montgomery, Alabama, one of our largest flatbed markets, outbound loads are at $2.56 a mile. 470 miles from Montgomery to Lakeland, Florida, $2.72 a mile. So the Southeast is a really rich lumber. It's the biggest market for steel production, which again is kind of surprising. I thought it was more Great Lakes region, but it's not. It's the Southeast is where most of our steel is produced. Steel tonnage is up for the second week in a row in the Southeast. Still down about 4% year over year, but still up. Gary, Indiana is the second largest steel production market. Load post volumes are up 30%. So there's more spot market activity coming for coil steel and rebar and plate and all that sort of stuff. Even Chicago flatbed rates are up. So when you think about the Southeast, it's a very strong area for flatbed carriers, and the outbound average rates are much higher than the national average because there's so much more steel volume. And of course, that coincides with the annual peak in steel production in March. Now, it also coincides with a lot more lumber moving. It also coincides with the peak in imports into Baltimore and Houston for a lot of row machinery. So you've got a lot of roll-on, roll-off, rubber-tired dozers, bulldozers, skid steers, backhoes, all those things. That peaks typically ahead of planting season. So March is a really busy time for flatbed carriers generally, and we're already seeing rates start to move back up after a pretty significant drop. In the last couple of weeks, or in fact the first 5 weeks of the year, flatbed rates have dropped the least. Refrigerated rates have absolutely dropped the most compared to previous years, but flatbed's been pretty, I will say flat, to use a play on words, but it's actually pretty healthy at the moment for flatbed carriers, which is good for the carriers, I think. I'm sort of always on the carrier side, so I'm probably getting yelled at by people watching this.
You know what, Dean? This brings up an interesting thing when you're talking about flatbed rates, and the reason is if you recall, POTUS signed a $1 trillion infrastructure bill back in November of last year, which everybody was predicting was going to have a huge impact because the sheer capacity that was needed to move all the steel structures around the country to rebuild, the bridges and the roadways, etc. That didn't really have a big impact, did it?
Well, not on the long haul truckload sector. Absolutely not, because a lot of that infrastructure is going to move short haul, very regional, asphalt, plate steel, gravel. I posted a picture or a video on Instagram that my wife took on the way to the airport here this week. It's worth having a look at, but it was a steel girder for a bridge, and there's about 20 of them. They're hauling from up in Maine all the way down to Rhode Island, and they have police escorts. And this thing must have been, it could have been 150 feet long. There's a long spans. This is a massive beam. And but the interesting, and I knew one of the drivers. So when I did the video and posted it, he said, "Oh, that's me." And we got chatting. But this was the infrastructure bill at work, because every morning at 9:30 on I-95, every morning they've been running, and I've seen them a couple of times running. I thought that's interesting, and the really interesting thing for me was they had a police escort front and back, but they were flying in the hammer lane. In the hammer lane, flying. They have 4-axle self-steering trailers, tri-axle, tri-drive trucks, and there were 2 of them and escorts back to back. And the police set the speed, so they're allowed into Massachusetts at 9:30 a.m. and they go like you've never seen trucks go. It took me every bit of my driving skills to get close to these guys with these long, heavy loads. But the police troopers set the speeds through on I-95, and they have people out the front blocking and clearing traffic. So long story short, it's our infrastructure bill. This is probably a 200-mile haul from a local company that's making the steel for the bridges. So we've always said that the impact will be, made up. That's why I looked at Gary, Indiana and Birmingham markets for steel production. We'll see some lift out of there for sure on regional haul loads, but I think a lot of it's going to be mostly regional short haul. In particular, I think the guys that got, dump trucks will be doing particularly well out of this. But I see it on the highways. I see roads being widened, interstates being going from 2 to 3 lanes to 4 lanes. I think it's already happening. I did a post about that. I think we talked about it on the show, but people normally joke about 2 seasons, winter and construction. Well, in the middle of winter, people are building stuff still. Construction season is like all year round at the moment. So I think we're seeing the lift. But we've still got too much capacity, right? So when we look at our capacity numbers, we were losing capacity up until December. We lost 2,000 carriers in October, about 1,500 about 2,900 in December. Early part of January, we've turned positive. So it means there's fewer carriers leaving, more are coming in, but it's only 1 week's worth of data. So I'm not getting too carried away. I've got to wait for 4 weeks worth of February data before we say that the market has bottomed out in terms of the exodus of carriers leaving the industry. And that sort of lines up with how we think spot rates are going to play, because our short-term forecasts already have spot rates bottoming out this week and next at about $1.75 to $1.78 a mile. So that's where we think we're at the bottom of the spot market, which is important if you think about where do contract rates go, because they'll follow in a few months. They'll follow back up, even though new rates coming in from routing guides are down 6% in dry van compared to previous contracts. They are still going down, but stubbornly, slowly. For shippers, carriers are being more price disciplined, is the word I heard from the large carriers yesterday. We also heard that from our shippers. They were sticking with their incumbent carriers that played nicely during the pandemic, giving them more volume, lower rates, but going deeper with them, in terms of that relationship and partnership. And then, as we've talked about on the show, for the brokers on the call, strategically pushing more volume to the spot market on low volume lanes, which is really a place where I think we can do some incredible work, in terms of moving freight. Getting more freight out of the contract market into the spot market is one of the trends that's driving some of those volumes, because we are still seeing, even though volumes are flat and so much more of freight is moving under contract versus spot, we're still seeing more spot volume in week 5 compared to prior years by about a factor of 9% more than the average for week 5. So there's much more spot market volume moving, which is good for brokers and good for carriers in the spot market.
I love that you said that. And just coming back to, I don't know if you guys are seeing it in the States, but what we're seeing. So my wife and I, we've hit 2 years in our new home, and we're looking to obviously expand and get a bigger house. But what we're seeing is that a lot of people are doing like they're doing renovations in their house to make it more modern. I think the big thing, I don't know if everywhere else is, but the big thing in our area is open space. Just having
Right,
that open
right,
concept and not having walls, like not having walls for sections of
right,
rooms. I remember my
right,
childhood
right,
home, everything had walls. You want to go to the dining room, there was walls. If you want to go to the kitchen, there was walls. But even if you came to our house, everything's completely open concept. And I understand because my dad is a contractor himself, and he says even his weekend jobs, those weekend warriors of like
right.
doing
Yep.
renovations, like adding bathrooms to a basement or simple
Mm,
things like that doesn't affect outside, like if you want to build a deck and something like that. So it's
right.
interesting to see. And I was actually going to call one of my customers is Suprema, and they're a large manufacturer of construction goods, and they were saying yesterday on a call like they're basically staying until March, and then that's when everything kind of picks up. So it's going to be
Right,
a kind of a
right.
slow crawl, and
Yep,
kind of want to
yep.
confirm capacity and all that fun
Yeah.
stuff, right? So
Well, David
it's interesting
Jackson
to see.
here on the David Jackson from CEO of Knight Swift, who's probably would they be the largest for hire carrier in the country? Knight Swift, I guess they would be, right? For hire truckload. On the presentation yesterday, he said that, and he said the same on their earnings call, that unanimous response from his shippers was that their inventories will be run down by the midpoint of the year, and they will be back to normal order cycles in the second half of the year. So that's why a lot of the truckload carriers are very upbeat about the outlook around the middle of the year. That's about when we think contract rates will turn. So that's what our forecasting is looking for. But that's when he says the unanimous response from our shippers is that we'll have our inventories back to normal, we think, by the middle of the year. But that's a good sign for all of us. I think that shows some more stability coming back into the market, more
Just hope it
predictability.
happens.
What was that?
I just hope that it happens.
Yeah, me too. Well, so one of the analysts here jumped up and said, well, why are you so optimist, when I was talking on stage? And I said, well, I just how I'm wired. Like I always see the glass half full. And he said, and then he started rattling off all the stuff that could go wrong. And I thought, well, if any of that happens, like this is a whole different discussion. We're probably not here, talking about stuff like this. So,
I mean, that's the kind of discussion we had when we were talking about the imports and all the disruptions and everything. And it didn't happen,
Hey, imports. We got the latest data yesterday. I don't know if you want to segue to imports, Ryan. I'm happy to. I've got some data there that we could cover. Yeah. So we looked at the peers. The peers data set we get from IHS Market, which is now owned by Standard & Poor's Platts. We look at this data every month at a port level. And I'll read off some of the stats here that Christina Ellington, our data analyst, was able to put together for me. So remember, these are preliminary, so they've got to be vetted because these numbers come from the bills of lading that the Customs and Border Patrol process. So they take a bit of cleaning up and verifying after month end. But national volumes up about 1% compared to December, which is interesting. But the slowest start to the year since 2018. So volumes are still way down. Down about 16% year over year, trending at about 2018 levels. Compared to 2018, January volumes are about 1.6% higher, just over 2 million TEU. Remember, we talked about this as a critical data point. We've been at 2 million, over 2 million for about 28 months. That's but down around 2 million is when our supply chain normalizes. East Coast down 11% year over year. But up 1.7% from 2019. These are sort of some benchmarks to think about. West Coast down 23% year over year on the West Coast. That's the lowest level since 2011. So West Coast import volumes have really tanked. Gulf Coast, though, and again, remember this is a smaller, there's not as much volume as the East and West Coast on the Gulf Coast, down 8% year over year, but at the second highest level on record, and even 18% higher than in 2021. So that's the quick summary of the data on the import side. This is the quiet season, so we're no surprise about volumes being lower. But I think the data point that really confirmed what we've all talked about is there's been a sizable shift in freight volumes to Houston, in particular. Yep. We see it on the truckload market side. We see a lot of spot market volume. And when you think about this data, folks, just don't think about containers. This is break bulk also. So there's ro-ro, roll on, roll off, break bulk, reefer, hazmat, non-hazmat. So this is sort of all TEUs. I haven't included in any of those numbers all the break bulk tonnage, which I'm going to do next week, because the break bulk tonnage is sort of those special project loads that flatbedders and low bedders and flatbed and drop decks and all those sorts of things go on. Break bulk volumes have been surging also into the Gulf Coast. So
crazy, because I know Jeff's a big import guy. He definitely keeps on track of that, and it's
Yeah.
important to know that because you see that impact. Jeff, just ask you a question here. From imports, taking the import data, how can somebody use that if they're doing truckload within North America? Like, when does that import data start affecting the truckload market?
Well, it really all depends, right? To Dean's point, when you're looking at a lot of the shippers, right, switched from LALB and they started moving a lot of their freight back into Houston or even going into the New York, New Jersey market. And we've seen that over the last several months, cheaper to move their product out. We did an analysis not so long ago where we said, you know what, we'll bring it into LA and we'll ship it here, or we'll bring it in to Houston and ship it to the same location. And lo and behold, it was cheaper for us and the shipper to bring that freight into Houston to deliver it to the same location rather than it was very unusual. So these kind of stats that Dean is talking about is very impactful to the way that people do and conduct their business, especially if they have a lot of imports in there. They must have their finger on the pulse and follow that, because it's helping them to dictate what they're going to do down the road, sort of speaking. And again, the market can change on a dime, right? We've seen it, but it's a little different now than it has been in the past, for sure.
Yeah. The data point I was reading last week, I think it was Ari Ash from Journal of Commerce was writing about. He has the truckload index he has these shipper truckload index where he measures the premium that shippers get from the premium over railroad by shipping on the railroad versus shipping on a truck. So he measures how much a shipper saves by using the railroads. And one of the things that he was talking about was truckload is still incredibly competitive on short haul. Railroads have a lot of problems on short haul, east of the Mississippi in particular. But when you've got to use rubber to move containers across Chicago, it gets very problematic and costly, and you have lots of delays. So on the long haul sector, truckload is pretty competitive. On the short haul sector, though, a lot of volume still moves on truckload because I think the intermodal networks have a difficulty doing that.
Oh yeah, yeah. You want to stay at 700 miles at least, or greater.
Yeah, but the data point that caught my attention was, and he said the competition in long haul won't come from truckload; it will come from all of the intermodal carriers undercutting each other to get volume. Yes. And he listed Hub and JB Hunt and Schneider, and so all those companies that have big intermodal networks were looking to secure, obviously book all their slots they're paying for on trains. Interesting data point that he shared with us, and I think it was in an article. It might have been on the Journal of Commerce where he wrote about it. Because normally truckload, when truckload rates drop to the levels they are now, and they're about half what they were on Los Angeles, Chicago at about $1.50 a mile. Normally you see a lot more volume moving on truckload because it's much cheaper and faster than putting it on a rail. So there's some interesting things going on. To your point, Jeff, we're seeing there's a lot more capacity on the West Coast versus freight because you've got a lot less imports coming in. Yep. I think the interesting play here is that the ILWU hasn't ratified their agreement that expired last July. Yeah. So I'd love your perspective on this, Jeff, because if you think about spring inventory, that probably was ordered, late last year and it's already in. But shippers that are making ordering decisions now for summer, fall, next retail season in December inventory, they would have to be thinking, I need to keep my ocean routing services away from Los Angeles again for the second year. Was that how they would think about this at this time of the year?
I don't think so. I just think that a lot of shippers out there are very tentative because of disruptions they saw in the past, that they just don't want to take that chance and be hit with the D&D charges,
which
and
is
just the
substantial.
total disruptions. I mean, I don't know. I think they would pay a little bit more if they need to get that transit time that's needed to get their inventory into their warehouses rather than take that chance and have it sit there for weeks on end. So
right. So what sort of lead time? Like if I'm thinking fall, inventory, full fashion inventory. A lot of that's going to move on air cargo planes, of course. But let's just say we had something that had to be here for fall, some particular commodity line. When would you typically be ordering that from a shipper's perspective if it was coming from overseas?
Oh, I mean, it depends on where. I mean, I have a friend that is seeing like 30-day transits.
That's the transit. So, but I have to get it booked into the factory.
It could be 30, it could be 45, and
right.
depending upon what port it's coming in, the typical delays of getting it through customs and clearing it, and being able to get in there and get the containers, I mean, 50 days. I mean, as a general, sometimes they move it in a little quicker so that they don't run into those disruptions. I mean, look what just happened on the railway with that huge derailment, right?
Yeah, in Ohio.
In Ohio. I mean, I don't know what that's going to be as far as disruptions in that area, but man, that was bad.
So remember the last 2 years, the holiday season inventory we saw in 2021 come in. I think it was like June, July. It was starting to surge. Volumes were surging. I think the same thing happened last year, a little bit earlier last year. So that's why a lot of that freight had already been moved. So I'm kind of curious if you're a shipper looking at ocean routing, would you be thinking the same thing this year, given the probability of West Coast delays is still there from a labor perspective, but because volumes are so low, the throughput's there. You can get freight in and out. So I'm just curious as to whether this East Coast shift in freight sticks, or whether some of it goes back.
Modern trends too, and how much space that these warehouses have available to bring in this new inventory. Right. I don't have those stats. I don't know if you have those stats as far as where it was, where it is now, and how much space on average they have available, depending upon where that warehouse is located in the States. I mean, it's all relative, right? It's that timing. It's that timing of being able to get it into the States, being able to warehouse it for a period of time before those key holidays and those things.
So one of the big investors down here, PE firm, I was talking to him at dinner last night, and he said one of the things we're meeting with a group of firms down here is to decide whether Miami is a bubble or not. So he was referring to the massive growth in warehouse space, but he just used the word bubble, and I thought, well, that's very interesting. So what is that? What you guys are obviously worried about, downside risk of demand falling away, which kind of leads to our question about imports being routed to the East Coast. We're definitely seeing more. I think the experts are calling it China plus one, which is that additional supply chain redundancy they want to build in for another country like Vietnam, away from China. So they've got a different option. So that's that nearshoring. Oh, sorry, that's the reshoring that they've been talking about. Yeah, so that's and that changes the routing to the East Coast for a lot of those carriers. So it's absolutely a factor.
Yeah, people are looking at different types of options and alternatives because of what they went through, during the pandemic and all the problems and issues that they have. I mean, do you blame them? No, not really.
Not at all.
Not at all. Well, yeah, I mean, probably so. If they look at how much money they spent on D&D and all this, the high labor cost and transportation, and all of that, maybe it's worthwhile for some of them. Maybe not all, but some of them, and I'm sure they're looking at that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that the market did was, I think it's shortened the cycle times because there was so much volatility and so many things broke and were upended. We are 12 months. We're just coming up the anniversary of Russian rental prices going through the roof and spot rates sliding south. So we're almost up on those pretty hard year-over-year comps. But this was, it was only a year ago that the market turned significantly in terms of, capacity loosening, rates dropping, diesel prices going up. But we're already, 12 months later, we're already looking at the bottom of the market and the next cycle starting. It's on the spot side, and think about contract rates started to drop in the middle of last year. It'll be the middle of this year before they start to, revert back up. That's a fairly short cycle compared to previous years. So I think the data point that we've been looking at is the duration of cycles. They seem to be getting shorter, but much more volatile on the up and the down is what we've been looking at. If I get in the camera frame, it's like that. So that's what's. I think, well, it's like the guy that's asking you to navigate, right? And he's on the dock and he's just going like this. I said, no, dude, do this.
Yeah.
So I can see you.
Yeah.
Don't just keep going like that. Then I'm breaking the deck leveling plate, and I'm in.
And then they know they hit it when you get that whiplash.
Yeah.
You know.
Yep. You're there, dude.
Yep. That's it.
Yeah. So, all good.
It's awesome
All
kind of
good.
see. And Dean, I think like all this data that we're having, like we talked last week, tell that story with data, with all the information that we have today, because I know for myself, there's so many topics we can go and talk to our prospects about right after this call specifically. Valentine's Day, Super Bowl, all the imports, construction, all that stuff. And the one thing that I think what's we should be using is in being able to be clear and concise with what we're actually telling the story to be, right, Jeff?
Yeah.
Because you always want to kind of just say, hey, this is what it is. What are you seeing? I got a question before we kind of lead off here, because I'm seeing it on my end here. We always talk about, hey, the spot market is kind of like dropping, rates or something like that. But I feel like there's always kind of an ongoing struggle where carriers, I'm not kind of put a general broad thing, because it's not everybody, but some carriers, they don't pass on, let's say, the savings or even the increases. They'll pass on the increases, but they won't pass on the savings onto the brokerage. And we're kind of just seeing that from, okay, well, we can't operate from last year's rates because those are not feasible for right now. I would love to get both of your thoughts, as Jeff being an operations guy and Dean being the data scientist as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll have a swag at it. Just from an operating cost perspective, we've seen carriers be much more disciplined, but not prepared to lower their costs anywhere near what they did in 2019. There is less capacity in the market, but they've got much higher operating costs. If I look at my spreadsheet today, my operating costs at $1.95 a mile, I'm up 13 cents a mile year over year. I can't give that back. Like if I was going into an RFP for, a solo truck owner operator, I can't haul for less than that, because I'm dropping $1,500 in diesel in my tanks every 3 days. You just can't do it. So the big change this time around is we've got a new floor in operating costs. It's the same for Werner and Swift. The big dogs have got higher operating costs because they've had to pay more to get drivers. So they save a little bit on the fuel side because they get volume discounts, but everybody's operating costs have gone up. And the thing is that carriers have been, when I say disciplined, this is different. They haven't normally just, chased, it hasn't been a race to the bottom. Rates are, if you look at contract rates, they are very stubbornly decreasing, but not at a very fast clip. So I think that's what we're seeing, a much more disciplined market this time, mostly because of diesel prices.
Yeah, I think the main thing is that when you're negotiating prices for your customers, that what I say to the carriers, I do a mini RFP, so it's not a substantial one where it's locked in for a year because of the volatility in the market. So what I'll do is I'll go back to the carriers and go, listen, here's the rate that we're looking to hit. Here's my benchmark. If you're able to hit it, this is what I'm going to do. We're going to revisit every couple of weeks or maybe every single month to see what the market's doing and whether or not you're getting paid appropriately. If we see a drastic change in that, we're going to have a discussion, and I'm going to have a discussion with my shipper and say, hey, listen, this is what we're seeing, because you can't lock it in, because these truck drivers are losing their shirts literally if they lock. Let's just say that, West Coast to the East Coast, from Ontario to Elkridge, Maryland, $5,000, right? How is that? How long is that going to be sustainable? It's going to hit the $7,000 to $8,000 at some point. So, are you going to lock in a $5,000 rate annually on that? No, you're not going to do that. Yet that carrier is going to be long gone and looking for higher prices, to feed his family. For sure, I'd do that, So that's why you have to have that collaboration, be that honest, and and have that integrity, show that transparency, and tell your shipper, this is what we're seeing. We have to take care of the carriers. Carriers are taking care of you. So,
yeah. I was just, pulling up some rates here. So while we talk about national average refrigerated rates for all, temp control and frozen at $2.09 excluding fuel. So what's that? $2.09? Call it $2.70, the give or take, including fuel. The average spot rate for hauling fruit and veg specific loads nationally is $3.78 a mile.
Wow.
So the last time it was $3.78 a mile was back on 5/11/21. So if it depends on where you are and what you haul, right? I mean, the national, as always with the national average. Remember, we say on the show here, there's no one home at the average because it's an average of everything. But there are specific markets and lanes that carriers can run, and you could bid on where the margins are much higher and the demand is much higher. Our national average is $1.78, but our top 50 lanes are $2.02. Right, so it depends where you run and where you place yourself. And I think that if I could quote our fearless leader Dan Deigan, about a year ago we were talking on this show, and he was quoting a story about a flatbed carrier in Michigan or Detroit or something like that. And our advice at the time was, you need to get ahead of this and get your capacity locked in before this market turns. And I'm already seeing those warning signs for flatbed carriers right now. This market is going to turn, capacity will tighten, and rates will go up. So if you're in the contract space looking to move project freight, getting your carriers in line now and getting the right rate set is going to be absolutely critical, I think, this year.
Yep. Absolutely. I could not agree with you more. That's what it's all about, and that's why a lot of carriers, when they see, project freight, how long is it going?
Right.
Always ask that question seriously, because they don't want to get locked in to a ridiculous price that's not sustainable for them to go through the whole year. They're not going to do it.
Right.
They're going to drive real fast away from you. See ya.
Well, I saw that with show freight, like concerts.
Right.
There was a concert last year that they quoted like last February, and it was moving in October. And when they came to us with the rate, we laughed, right? We're like, there's no way, like this is, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Like I was like, are you missing some zeros here? But you can't really, even for us too, like we do show freight here, we don't quote out stuff unless it's like 90 days prior, just because we can't, just because how complex it is, right? It's just with the insurances and everything.
Well, in sales, that's called the flinch test, right? See who blinks first.
Yeah,
throw a number out. So throw a number out and see who throws up.
That's right. It really comes down to how risky are you. I mean, that's what it comes down to, because you got a cheap rate like that, you don't know who's going to be picking that rate up right now. I don't think it's worth it. Seriously.
I had a boss. We would go into Case Farm Machinery in Australia negotiating our Case contract, because we moved Case Farm Machinery, Case New Holland, all over the country. And he said, if you smile once, I'm going to beat the crap out of you when we get back to the yard. He said, you keep your best poker face. Don't you dare smile, because when I throw the number out, I don't want you to even blink. And he was a master negotiator. This was like, but he said to me, don't even crack a smile, don't blink, don't do anything, because the guy's going to be watching you for your reaction. Because if you do an eye roll or anything, we are toast. So the negotiation was really a flinch test on the CEO, but we had to keep our poker faces to see what his reaction was first. It was a really interesting negotiation tactic. I don't know whether you guys do that, but I always thought
I'd fail. I smile all the time. I'd fail. So.
You've got to be nice and friendly. You said, no, it's $5,000 a load. And just, he said, what?
Take it or leave it.
Let me tell you what we have to do. Yeah, blah, blah, blah.
It's awesome to see. So, Dean, want to thank you so much for coming out, for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you could have been on the beach with your wife this morning, but you decided to come here and be with us this morning. So it's truly appreciated. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it as always.
Awesome. And, from behalf of the Bodacious Cowboy and myself, I want to thank everybody for coming out this morning. Please catch the replay at 12 and 3 p.m. Eastern Time, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Join us tomorrow as we hit our season finale. We hit recap week 4 of what we talked. So that was actually last week, discussions that we had, clients for life, and different discussions that we're going to have tomorrow. So tune in tomorrow, 9 a.m. We're so happy to see everybody. Have an amazing day. Crush your sales. And don't forget, use data to sell your story so that you can get some more customers and get some more prospects. All right. Take care, everybody.
Take care. Audacious Cowboy out.